Hello everybody, it's ShadowSlayerX, and we're continuing our Dungeons & Dragons project, 5th edition. So this one's going to be about locations, cities, villages, towns, countrysides, coasts, islands, caves, ruins, dungeons, etc, etc, etc. So what does that mean? So in the first one we were talking about races, because we want to know exactly what are going to be the humanoid races that are usually in charge of towns, all this stuff, cities, towns, villages, blah blah blah. Like, when I come and when I say races, I usually mean all races are sentient usually, but these are the races that have developed culture, language, and the races don't always have to be like everyone doesn't always have to be getting along. Like, you can have a race that that owns 100-year-old city, well defended, blah blah blah, but it had been abandoned, and then they took up a residence there, and then they, like, for instance, we'll say like maybe they're kobolds. Kobolds are like very small lizard-like, dragon-like creatures. Yeah, and usually they're looked down upon for not being as intelligent, but if they had taken over a place and developed culture, they turned it into their own place, and then maybe it would gain the attention of the goblins in the neighboring region, or the humans down south have heard word, stuff like that. But we have to create these locations, these places, these cool things. So I wrote down some stuff for brainstorming, right? So every area should have a water supply, I believe. Like, it has to be a well, a lake, or in some cases, a magical spout of water, rain collection systems, stuff like that. I mean, these are medieval people, so they don't know about germs and all that stuff. They just know if the water looks good or bad, or tastes good or bad, right? If there's sulfur in the water, like, it's going to smell bad, taste bad. There's also the spell in Dungeons & Dragons where it's purify food and water, basically. So you can work that into your thinking structure. Like, well, maybe they'll have a town elder or a village elder who's magically inclined, or has been training people to do this, or like that's a job in your city. Yeah. So yeah, the second point here, areas further from each other might use different building materials and build in different architectural styles. One of the examples I had is a place that has marble to mine nearby, and they use it in their city structure, kind of like Rome had like marble pillars and all that stuff, and like you see it in the movies when they're walking across that nice white and with some dark in it floor, and it's so super smooth. If that's for people who don't know what marble is, most of you do, I think. So, if you don't, I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend. Look it up. Google's awesome. Yeah. So a big city that has marble nearby to mine, or even a small town, like, because that might, like, the only things they might have are stone and marble. Excuse me. But they're going to use what they have, right? They're going to use the most of what they have. Unless it's going to be like a gluttonous town, like the people there are very greedy, so they have it stockpiled somewhere. Yeah, so they might have a storehouse, like they might have all these little like houses around, and then a big storehouse somewhere, maybe stuff like that. Also, people who live in a more forested area will use a lot of wood, right? What else? I mean, places that can mine iron, lapis lazuli, bunch of different minerals and different building, like gold. Gold's obviously a big one. If you can inlay gold, it probably shows that you have some wealth. Yeah. A third point, what kind of government systems do they have? Like I mentioned before, village elders, mayors, kings and queens, counts, countesses, dukes, duchesses. Anything you can think of that like can be given a title, like a title of some wealth. Like, what's Robin Hood. He wasn't a duke. He wasn't a count, was he? He had a title. It was Robin of Locksley. But that made him something like because he owned Locksley or something like that. I forget. Put in the comments if you know what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, this is pretty much, it's pretty self-explanatory. So, like, who has the power? Because when you come to a town, who's going to ride out? Like, if there is an army approaching your town, right? The people rather, if there's no one to elect, everyone will come out and be like standing in front of their homes, holding like their pitchforks or their their cooking spoons or ladles, and they're gonna defend their homes. But who's gonna be sent out to treaty with these people? Is there someone appointed? Like, is it the strongest warrior of the town? Or the biggest built guy or woman will walk out and question, what are you doing here? Have you come to pillage us? Are you just walking through? Stuff like that. Right. Fourth point. I should have numbered these. I'm going to have to remember every single one. What kind of gods or no gods do the people place worship? Or do the people... What kind of gods do the people... Oh, the people of a place, comma, worship. So this refers to the last video, gods and goddesses, which also, that one refers to the video before. See how these are all kind of meld together. Hopefully I did it in the right order. So, for instance, like we said, those kobolds, right? Those kobolds that have rebuilt this giant castle town, giant metropolis city with great big walls defending it and maybe even a moat, stuff like that. So, yeah, we'll keep using them as a great example. So they've elected a king. So they have the kobold king, right? And the kobold king may worship one of the gods that akin themselves to dragons. So if we have a dragon god, dragonborn god, anything like that, and they identify with those gods' ways of thinking and the rule. They might even be given a boon, because the king might have like not a sacrifice, but like a giant offering to the god to gain their attention. We've claimed this land for you, and they might even be given a boon, like all the kobolds in that town, or anyone in that town at the time of this boon being given to them, boon being like a buff or a beneficial ability or something like that. So maybe all the people in the town have been given increased strength, better sight, stuff like that, like something cool, right? So yeah, so the people of that place would worship that. But if we go back to that, we'll say the human town where the guards are, the army's passing through, they might know a couple gods. I mean, they're not too educated, so they're like, oh yeah, we've heard of this person, but we don't worship them. So they might not worship anyone, but they do believe in a greater power. So stuff like that. Fifth point, how do they survive the changing of seasons? So what do they do for food, warmth, trade, etc.? We'll go back to the small town. So the small town, because that's harder, right? People who live in a giant castle or whatever, they have more resources. They have protection from wind. They can build certain things. But if you're a tiny little town, you have no castle walls. You may only have like 10 houses. And due to your architectural style, maybe their houses are all back to back to back, or maybe, yeah, like they might all be connected, but not inside. So like each person has an individual area. Sure, you could punch through to someone else's area, but everyone, like, they could be like that, or they could be spread out randomly, built as needed. So what do? Like, do they have designated hunters? Do they have designated farmers? Do they, for warmth, do they shear wool off of Do they shear wool off of sheep or other animals that have large fur? Or do they know how to greatly insulate their homes? Stuff like that, right? Or is there a magic user who can cast a spell around the town, around a house, around people? So, yeah, like, just let your imagination fly, right? And then what do people do for trade? So, for instance, trade for me in this the way we're talking here is, as the seasons change, different like crops grow, fruits ripen, stuff like that. We can even come up with our own fruit. So we can come up with like shizzle deads, which are a winter fruit that grows on trees with no leaves during the winter. Like, they just need sunlight or something. I don't know. Like, I want people to go nuts. Obvious things to trade are metals, like precious metals, iron, aluminum, tungsten, like, and then we can come up with the rarities of the metals in the world. Like, maybe this world's abundant in silver, but there's not very much gold, right? Although in Dungeons and Dragons, having silver as a rare commodity is usually better, because silvered weapons can damage a lot of specific enemies out there in the world. So personally, silver has to exist. I love it, but I don't want it to be abundant. There could be a town that is like known for silver and people have to go there to get it. That's cool. And there could be multiple places like that. But I just don't want, like, your heroes to walk up to the town. It's like, we heard there's a werewolf nearby. Do you have any silver? And then it's like, well, of course. We have 1 silver blade. It's like, well, we need 4. Something like that. Well, you have to go to this town. Exactly. 6th point? Is that right? Sure. Are there any criminal organizations, religious cults, fanatical groups, etc.? And where do they stay? Do they have a front business or location that they hang out in? So this is also really fun, and it kind of goes towards the next video, which will be NPCs. But it's not quite there yet, because for this, we just need to know, if we're telling you something about a town, right? So we'll go back to the villagers again. So if you were to look at it on a piece of paper, title is name of the village, maybe you'll have like a picture of what it roughly looks like, and then if you were to list the traits, it'll say, well, this town has a well near it, right? There is nothing nearby to mine. They are sheep farmers. They're they raise sheep, and we'll say they have small farms of potatoes, corn, stuff like that. There is 2 designated hunters in the town to go look for meat. And then, for instance, it'll say the village elder of this town worships this person, and the whole town actually has a cult, and they meet up in the biggest building. Maybe there's a basement under the like the granary or something. So they go to the basement of the granary, and they talk about nefarious things, or they want to summon evil things from demonic realm or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe they wait for a traveler to come by, and whenever they get a traveler, they treat them well, and then in the middle of the night they kidnap them and sacrifice them to their patron or god or whatever for whatever reason. So if they sacrifice it to the god of agriculture, if that's his thing, right? Because you could have multiple gods of agriculture. One that is like a demonic evil one who will accept souls and blood for benefits. You know, stuff like that. Or you can have the opposite, where you have this giant offering set up outside in the open, maybe in a clearing. Maybe they've built something around it to make it look nicer, and an avatar of the god. So I think we mentioned in the god section that I want the gods to have an animal form that they're recognized with. So whatever god comes in, you see like a giant ethereal bear, and it comes by, and it's pleased with the offering, and it would consume it or absorb its energy of the offering, food or whatever. So it gets like used up, so the people understand. Like maybe the god doesn't actually need it, but he appreciates it, so like he just makes it all disappear, and he stockpiles it back in his realm. And like when people come to visit his realm, he's like, look how much my people love me, or something. Stuff like that. So I think that covers that. Well, that covers part of it. That was just an example. So a front business. So maybe in the cities, the bigger cities, there might be like a blacksmith, or even like a giant grocer, like a person who collects the best kind of foods around, or jewelry business or something. But what they sell is just mediocre. It's just okay. Maybe like a weapons salesman, like a weapons sales house or whatever. And when people come in, they can ask for a specific thing. It's like, do you have the silvered battle axe? And then the guy winks and says, yes, but we only keep that in back. And then the guy goes out back, and that's where they have their like criminal organization. So that's where the criminals all meet, and every week they change the weapon you need to know. So the guy will come in and say, do you have the tungsten excuse me, I'm dying. Do you have the tungsten broadsword? And the guy, he winks, yeah, come on back. So stuff like that. I think that would be cool. What is the land like? Is the nearby region mountainous? Is it filled with plains? Is it rocky, like craggy land? Are there ravines? Are there waterfalls, deserts, forests, jungle? There's so many. Is it tundra? Like, there's so many different things. Are there volcanoes nearby? Stuff like that. Basically, this part is more mappy, right? Like, if you were to look at a map and you had a legend where it's white with specks is mountainous, white is tundra, plains are light green, rocky is brown, ravines would just be like something you could draw in it, like this equals ravine. Waterfalls, again, symbol. Deserts could be light brown. Forests could be dark green. Jungles could be like neon green. Volcanoes, obviously, like doodad. But maps don't always tell you exactly what the land is like. For the people who live in that tiny little village, in your head, I don't know what you've pictured, but around them, they could be like on an outcropping in a mountain, which has a pass that goes through that the army could come through. They could be in plains with trees on an outskirt, but a road going through their town, so that like rather they've created the road was there when they started setting up, whatever. So once again, use your mind. Like that little village could be on a coast. With sand behind them, and maybe instead of having designated hunters, they have designated fishermen, people who spend all day fishing to get some sort of sustenance for their little village. And maybe further out in the waters there could be a dormant volcano, something like that. Things to make things more interesting. Is it 8th point? I don't know. What unique, usual, or prominent landmarks will an area have? So we kind of covered a little bit of that, but windmills, water mills, mines, why would they need these things? Like the windmill could have some contraption connected to it that will rotate like a stone that might be connected to something else that grinds ingredients together for food, stuff like that. I mean, I'm not a big expert on that. But, like, I think in Skyrim, the water mills, they would move things along so that it would move the blade to cut things. Is that right? Couldn't remember. Are there nearby mines, cool and unique rock formations, shrine, temple, church, cathedral, to a god, several gods, demonic gods? You never know. It could be a front, right? What kind of coasts are nearby? Do the places have hospitals, bathhouses, brothels, libraries, schools, cemeteries? This list could go on and on and on, but I didn't want to fill out this whole page. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. What do you want your town to be? That little village that we talked about, maybe they have one building that they use as a school for let's say there's like 6 kids, right? So someone's taken upon them to teach them things. They might not have school every day, and on other days that place could be like a bakery where those who are inclined to baking, I don't want to say all the women come out, because like guys like to bake too. I like baking. Come on. Stuff like that. Are the bigger cities divided into wards or districts? How are they mapped? Are there tolls in between the wards or districts, or is there a toll to get into the city? So for instance, let's go back to our kobold city. So they've been left alone for years and years and years and years. And when they offered their big offering to their god, he gave them a boon of intelligence. So if their IQ was low, and he may have doubled it to equal or even surpass human intelligence or whatever, that's cool. So they start to really develop, and what you were picturing before of these little lizard-like creatures of maybe trying to figure out what was here before really start to get it, and they really make it their own. So kind of like in Warcraft when the orcs create Orgrimmar, they really turn that place into their own. It was just like a formation in the rocks there, perfectly. It's like a perfect place to fortify and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, wards and districts. That's a huge thing because you might divide your place by wealth, or you might divide your place by race. Like, it might not be a negative thing. Some people might think that, but for instance, the Dragonborns might like to hang out with other Dragonborns. They might want to have a section of their of the city because they want to be citizens of the city, but they would like to build their own houses their way. They might not want to live in a house built for a human. You know what I mean? So it's not always a negative thing. They might want larger doorways or taller doorways, or they might want to grow certain things in the area, but the roots of a certain dragonborn tree that only grows fruit that like their teeth can really get into or something, or humans would have to cut a sword and carve out the juices of fruit. But what I'm saying is, and it wouldn't mean all Dragonborn live there. Like, some Dragonborn might live in the rich area, because or they'll live in the human district because they've fallen in love with a human or anything like that. So I think that's cool. How big are the city walls? So, if there are any. City walls is going to be a thing if a place is going to be a sanctuary for refugees or places, or it needs to be defensible because it's war times or stuff like that. Will it be able to withstand siege weapons? How long can it take? Like, could a wall take a catapult hit from a giant boulder? Or would that just, like, how thick are the walls? Stuff like that. What are the walls made of? Are there any tricks in the walls? Like, is there a thick layer of metal that was put into the wall? Usually not. Like, that would be for, like, some place that really wants to, like, is worried that they're going to be attacked, and so they've come up with the most defensible place. So, for instance, that'd be an interesting idea for, once again, not to go into race here, but for dwarves, because dwarves are very good with creating things with metal. So it'd be very cool to see them have like a front, like the outside is stone, because they're also good with stone. So outside they have very dense, hard stone to crack, but underneath they've got like this sheet, giant, thick wall of iron, like just hard iron. And maybe their thing was, it was one solid piece, but they kind of shaped it, right? So it's almost impossible to get through unless through magical means, dragons, stuff like that. Because like, have you ever heard of like an enchanted trebuchet or an enchanted catapult? Usually people don't put their magic into the thing. We have seen people who light up the rocks, like if they cover them in oil or they're surrounded with excuse me. No, it's always oil, isn't it? I don't know. But yeah, so you have that, and it goes, and it usually does extra damage because if the rock explodes or breaks, that fire can hopefully catch somewhere, right? Where else are we? What kind of guilds or craftsmanship places are there in a city, town, village, etc.? Guilds, I think, are really cool. So, you will always have like a blacksmith somewhere because someone has to make the weapons, right? But a guild would be a group of people who are all like-minded and they're all talented in the same vein. So, like, you might have the Guild of Arms, it might be called, or something. And it's a guild of blacksmiths, weaponsmiths, armorsmiths. And to become part of that guild, you might have to pay like an entrance fee, and then a yearly fee or something like that, or they'll collect fees or whatever. But to be part of this would mean that you get, you might be able to see blueprints of things or learn knowledges of how to make stuff. Or you might be invited in because you're so darn good, and you might get some bonuses. So if you're part of a guild and you go to a new town, you could go to the local guild there and ask, well, you would show like maybe some like little insignia, like maybe you have on your armor a patch, like it's like a sword being gripped on the blade by like 4 different hands or something, and once they see that, they're like, ah, come on in. And you might be given a free place to stay for your friends, stuff like that, or they'll tell you where to go, who to talk to, and they might give you like little bonuses and extra places to visit, and maybe you'll get discounts on things because you know certain people. It's like, tell them you know me, stuff like that. And then last but not least, how do people get rid of their waste? So when people have to go to the washroom, or people have to throw out rotten food, or where do people dispose of rotten carcasses? I mentioned cemeteries, I think, earlier, but where do people get rid of dead bodies? Do they burn them? So that goes again to different areas. Some areas believe if you burn the body, then the soul's released to go to heaven or whatever. Or in like the Game of Thrones world, in the north, if you burn the body, that way the body can't be resurrected by the Night King to become a White Walker or white. So yeah, I don't think I've covered everything, but I think I've given a good idea of what to start getting your head wrapped around about and what to start thinking of. I didn't really talk too much about islands and coasts or caves, ruins, or dungeons, but if I'm going to quickly touch on that, why am I coughing so much? Like coasts is pretty much just a town with the ocean nearby, right? Like I said, it just changes maybe the local food or local structures, even architecture, stuff like that. Caves and ruins, like mines we mentioned earlier, they can just be nearby, and they become one of the nearby unique or usual landmarks. Like, oh, those caves have been gone through hundreds of times, or we don't go to those ruins because there is this evil creature in there. Or, it doesn't have to be evil creature, it's like there's a dangerous creature there. And then dungeons are usually well, dungeons are weird because people sometimes think dungeons as in prison, right? Like it's just prison. Well, yeah, sure, you can have that kind of dungeon, but you can also have your dungeon where someone has hidden away something that they don't want the world to get at, or they don't want anyone to get at, or it was like an elaborate tomb for someone and they were buried with their armor and weapons. And it gets out there and people want to go in, but like I said, it was created for someone not to go in there. So people set up death traps or curses or magical wards, or they've placed magical traps, stuff like that. Usually magical traps is a good way to go because other traps are great if they have a reset mechanism, but some of those can't. Like you can't indefinitely have arrows shoot out of walls, but you could indefinitely have like a swinging blade come down, and then once it stops, there might be some mechanism, or even a person who manages it. He'll go back in and reset it, stuff like that. So I think that's it. If you have anything, you can email zapdos3002@hotmail.com. We're gonna move on to the next. What is the next one? I think next one's NPCs. Yeah, it's NPCs. So that's all. That's gonna be fun. We're gonna reference this and the other ones as well. I'm actually gonna come up with a couple NPCs for that one. I think that'll be the fun way to go. Yeah. All right. I've been ShadowSlayerX. I feel like I'm getting sick, but I apologize if I sound weird. A tip if you're feeling generous. We're building towards a new computer and completely new setup. I think we're at like $110, so we're awesome. We're getting there. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next time. Peace.